Recording.
If I'm getting off course, stop me, please. All right.
Okay.
Okay. Let me put up my PowerPoint presentation. Start my video. Okay. Okay. I hope you can see my face. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, as Grace has mentioned, we're going to be discussing home-based schooling generally, but more importantly, how one becomes an effective parent-teacher. Of course, this sounds contradictory because as parents, teaching is what we do on a day-to-day basis. We tell our children not to do this or not to do that. We show them how to turn on the television. We show them how to cook. We show them how to mop the floor. We show them how to cross the road. We show them how to become good human beings. We mentor them, we support them, we excite them, we motivate them. We admonish them, of course, when that is required. So we do this, in fact, on a day-to-day basis. But then the kind of teaching and learning that we're talking about is of a different type. It is the formal type, where children acquire particular skills, particular competencies, particular dispositions, and very particular capabilities. These are skills, competencies, attitudes, capabilities that allow them to live effective and competent lives as complete human beings. So it's quite critical. We have to support them to master the environment in which they find themselves. Later on, they acquire skill, which skill then they use to earn a living, again, to become competent members of society. So what we're going to be doing in this first series of this webinar is to just look at the introductory elements of becoming a good, effective, competent parent teacher. The idea here is not to do a crash course in teacher education. It takes 4 years, you know. The idea is, especially for today, is to introduce you to the general principles, you know, the overarching principles around how children learn and some of the important considerations that one has to keep in mind when you're trying to help children to learn. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Of course, in the second seminar, we're going to look at other elements, you know, the practical elements, you know, around how do you support your kids learn? How do you make the home an effective classroom? You know, stop the cooking, turn off the television, make sure the noise is out there, focus on the key, you know, get your routine going. If they need to wake up at 8 o'clock, they go to wake up at 8 o'clock, you know, keep away your conflicts. If you fight a lot with your spouse and ABCD, that's not a conducive environment for children to learn. So how do you manage that so that the classroom, in fact, is a very friendly, very welcoming, very conducive place for children to learn? We're going to look at how to prepare for lessons, because teaching, as you probably already know, it's a very deliberate process. It's a very deliberate enterprise. It is a deliberate exercise. So one has to prepare. How do you prepare for it? You know, those of us who are probably teachers or have taught before would know about things like schemes of work or lesson plans. We're not going to go into those technicalities. We're just going to look broadly in terms of, as a parent who is also busy working, who is also busy with other commitments, managing the home, how do you prepare so that you can become an effective teacher to your child or to your children? The important point of individual differences, we're going to be looking at that as well. You know, remember, children are complete human beings. They're just younger than you. They are complete human beings. They are fully formed. They have particular dispositions that are genetic, that they have acquired from you, that they have acquired from your husband, from your wife, that they have acquired from your grandfather, that, oh, sorry, I see is it my face that cannot be seen or something? Okay, can you see me properly now? Grace,
yeah.
is this better?
Yeah, this is better.
Okay, I hope you can see my beard as well. Thank you for that. So again, as I was saying, how do you make learning fun? The idea about learning, one of the greatest influences of how we learn is this lady called Maria Montessori. And what she says, the key point about what she says is that we have to replicate the way children play into the learning process. You don't tell children, go and play like this and like that and like that. All you simply do at times when you don't want them in the house and you want your peace, you tell them, go and play, go outside. They go out there, they figure out something, they organize, they do some decision making. Who's going to do this, who's going to do that? They share tasks, they keep changing and they enjoy it. The question becomes, how do you replicate this very approach to playing that children have mastered, that we did when we were children, into the learning process? So that it's not a fearful exercise, so that it's something that they look forward to, it's something that they enjoy. Then lastly, we're going to look at materials at home that we can use or utilize as learning props. Do you have to go to the shop and buy something? No. Can you use the bananas in your fruit basket to teach basic calculations? You've gone to the shop, you bought 5 bananas, you've given the kids 2 bananas. How many bananas are left? 3. So 5 minus 2 is 3, or 5 minus 3 is 2, So those kinds of things. So generally that is going to be the approach. When today, as I said, we're going to look at the general principles. Then on Tuesday and on Friday, we're going to look at the various elements. Now, let me clarify something, ladies and gentlemen. This is not just about managing the COVID-19 situation. It is a divine responsibility that we have as parents to help our children to learn. It's a commitment that we have as parents to personally raise and educate our children. Okay, so don't see it as just something that we do because we're managing the situation. It's something that I'd like to impress upon you to adapt as a lifestyle, so that you create in the home environment what I would describe as a lifestyle of learning. So teaching and learning, as you already know, should be treated as a seamless and in fact an organic part of living within a family that is in the real everyday world. It's something that should be ongoing. As I said, as parents, our key role is to help our children to grow up, to become competent, effective members of the society that we live in, and the societies that we live in future, which we do not know about. Learning at home is an interactive process. It's not a series of tasks to be tackled like we manage chores at home, that somebody has to take out rubbish, that somebody has to go to the shop and buy something, that somebody has to cook, that somebody has to mop the floor. It is an interactive process. It is a conversational process. It is a dialogical process. It is a social process. That's very, very important. It is an interaction between yourself and the children, your children. Okay? Now, the other important point before we move into the real stuff that I want us to look at today is you need to teach your children also because it's a privilege that you have as a parent. It is a good idea, it's a way of expressing affection for them. As a parent, as a father, as a mother, it's the greatest gift that you can give to your children. You give them knowledge, and by giving them knowledge, it's like hugging them. It's like holding their hand when you going to church, or when you're walking back home from church, or when you go to a park or something like that, And so when education, and this is a very important principle, is presented in this loving manner, in this empathetic manner, and with the correct understanding and attitude, you can't help, colleagues, but create an environment of mutual respect between yourself and your children, an environment of goodwill. This environment is going to serve you throughout, this journey that you have with your children as their parents, and also throughout the lives of your children. You develop trust, you develop understanding, you get to know who your child is in terms of his, her personality. You get to understand their strong points and their weak points. They get to develop the confidence that they can come to you and share their weaknesses, their strong points, their successes and failures with you. This is very, very important. As a parent, you're a mentor to your children. The children should have the confidence that they can come to you. So again, see this as something that goes beyond overcoming COVID. See it as a lifestyle, as a gift that you're giving to your children. But more importantly, don't just think of teaching your child. You know what you're doing? You are teaching your grandchildren's mother or father how to teach them. So in fact, you are training your grandchildren's teachers. The way you do it, that's how they're going to do it when the responsibility eventually falls on their shoulders, So learn to do it, love it, enjoy it, develop this relationship. And even when the school's open, continue doing it, and develop these relationships. Remember, at home, it's a one-on-one relationship. And there isn't a better teaching learning strategy than one-on-one teaching. It's one of the most effective teaching strategies. Of course, they need to be at school because there's the social element of teaching and learning. But treat this as a privilege, a God-given privilege, an opportunity for you to develop a different kind of relationship, an opportunity for you to strengthen trust between yourself and your children, and an opportunity, an expression of love from yourselves as parents to your children. Now, that was just the context, the background. Let's now go into what we're going to be looking at today. I don't know if there's a question up to this point. Can we proceed? Grace?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, yes, carry on. Sorry?
The presentation is fancy.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Thank you very much. Okay, now what we're going to do today is to look at the general principles of how children learn. Now, this is very important because these are principles that we're going to refer to. These are principles that are going to guide our practice. Some of the strategies that we're going to learn on Tuesday and on Friday, all of those strategies, in fact, are motivated by the principles that we're going to discuss today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss the principle and then briefly discuss how this principle can be applied in the actual teaching learning process. The principles we're going to look at are active learning. The second one is the principle of going beyond memorization and trying to support your children towards understanding. Why is that important? We're going to look at that. When you remember, one of the rules of thumb in education is, if you tell me how to do it, I forget. If you show me how to do it, I remember. If you tell me how to do it, I forget. If you show me how to do it, I remember, and therefore I know. So that is a key principle, the key point with regards to understanding rather than memorization. Then we're going to look at the principle of social participation. We're going to look at the principle of meaningful activities. How do we make teaching and learning meaningful? Something that the kids can relate to and find sense in. Then we're going to look at the principle of relating new information to prior knowledge. Another rule of thumb when it comes to teaching and learning is that you have to move from the known to the unknown. The students have a great repertoire of knowledge that they have already acquired. If they are in standard 2 or grade 2, they were at one point in grade 1 and in kindergarten or preschool, and they acquired some knowledge. Beyond that, they have watched television, and they've acquired some knowledge from television. Beyond that, they have read books, probably they've read newspapers, and they've acquired some knowledge from that. They have observed using their senses. They have smelled an ABCD. So they've got some knowledge already. And that is very important. We're going to look at how to build on that. How do you address misconceptions that they may have acquired? You probably have discovered late in the day when you have a discussion with a colleague that you actually understood something, misunderstood something, and you've lived with this misunderstanding or misconception for 20, 30, 40 years. And you're like, oh, I didn't know the sun is a star, actually, it's not a planet, something like that. You have to be strategic, Then how do we help students to learn to transfer? That is one way they acquire meaning and they see sense in what what we try to teach them. The other principle is the principle of practice. In fact, the definition of learning is a relative, permanent change in behavior as a result of practice. Why is it a relative, permanent change? It's because if you do not practice, you relapse, you do not know. It doesn't matter that yesterday you knew how to calculate 3 plus 5, and today you've forgotten, So practice is very important. As they say, practice makes perfect. The other principle we're going to be looking at is the principle of individual differences. We are different human beings. We are unique entities. Not one single child is similar to the other. They may share similar characteristics, but in the final analysis, even twins, in the final analysis, these are two different individuals. The fact that Onyango is good at mathematics does not mean that Makoha or Ibinji, all of them being your children, will also be good in mathematics. The fact that you're a lawyer does not mean that the student's logical intelligence has been developed to the same level as yours, or would have that disposition, okay? The fact that you're a mathematician, the fact that you're whatever you are, does not mean that your children are obviously going to be that. And I know parents get very frustrated because you see your children as your genetic footprint. And if they're your genetic footprint, then you expect them to replicate your capabilities, your skills, and you get frustrated when they don't do things that you consider very easy that you did while you were a child. So that's a very important principle that we're going to look at. The last principle that we're going to look at is the idea of motivation. Motivation. We all need to be motivated, to be encouraged, to be acknowledged, to be supported. So those are the principles we're going to look at. Now, we may not have sufficient time to delve into all the details, but trust you me, by the end of the third seminar, we would have covered everything. So let's go straight, unless there's a question, into the idea of active learning. Sorry, I'm trying to move down my, yes, got it, Now, the principle number one that I want us to look at, ladies and gentlemen, is the principle of active learning. Children learn by seeing, they learn by hearing, they learn by exploring, they learn by experimenting, they learn by asking questions. I will repeat because I think this is critical. Children learn by seeing, they learn by hearing, they learn by exploring, they learn by experimenting, and they learn by asking questions. In other words, learning requires the active, constructive involvement of a child, in this case, the learner. So you have to get your children to pay attention, to observe, to understand, to interpret, to make decisions, to challenge. You should not treat your children as blank slates. John Locke used to talk about it as tabula rasa, a blank slate on which you write your story. No, children are not ATM machines in which you put in money and when you need it, you go and withdraw it. They have fully formed brains that need to be challenged. Okay? Of course, they also need to memorize. Memory has a very important place in the teaching learning exercise. So active involvement is very, very important. Now, as a parent, what you need to do is you need to help your children to become active, goal-oriented learners. Goal-oriented because, as I mentioned earlier, the learning process is deliberate. Even if you're not consciously thinking about it, but it's driven by the need to achieve certain goals. If you want to teach your children, sentence structure, or what a verb is, or what a noun is, at the end of that process, you have to find a way of establishing if indeed that goal was achieved. All of us in our life engagements and the things that we do, they are goals that we set out to achieve. And learning rather, works in the same manner. It's informed by particular goals. So we need to build on the children's natural desire to explore. Children, it's unnatural to sit children in a room for 6, 7, 8 hours and speak to them and preach to them. That's very unnatural. Inbuilt in children, inherent in children, is that desire to want to explore, to understand new things, and to master them. It gives them an aha feeling, I've done it. In the same way, when you assign them a task at home and they do it, you see the satisfaction, the gratification. One is the fact that they did it. Secondly, because they know they have made you happy. But active learning requires careful planning. You need to choose the appropriate strategies. You need to find ways of engaging them, giving them feedback and materials that they can work with and ABCD. And you have to be enthusiastic. Most of you, all of us, at some point were in class or school, and the enthusiastic teacher always reached out to us, because you could see that the teacher was genuinely interested in what we were doing. So do the same thing as a parent. Now, in terms of some of the things that you might want to do in terms of active teaching is, number one, you have to avoid situations where your children, in this case your pupils or your students, are passive listeners, especially for long periods of time. They get bored very easily. They have to be engaged. Remember, especially if you've got children under the age of 12, they have got wandering minds. If they just listen, the mind switches to something else. We do the same thing. We do it at church, we do it at political rallies, we do it at school. If a preacher is preaching and you think he's talking nonsense, your mind switches to something else. If you are in a meeting and you think people are talking nonsense, at times you pull out your phone because you want to do something that you think it's engaging. Children are just like that. If what we're doing is not engaging them, it's not engaging their senses, it's not exciting them, they will switch their minds. But because of the power dynamic, of course, they will not move away, but they'll just sit there. Now, you need to create carefully designed activities that are going to require the child to talk, that are going to require the child to write, that are going to require the child to reflect, to think about something. Provide them with hands-on activities. So, for example, if you're teaching them, you want them to learn new vocabularies. First of all, you would have identified the text that you're going to use. Get some good, nice stories. You can read for them. Remember, even when your children can read for themselves, it's still critically important that you read to them. Remember, you're not reading for them. The preposition is critical. You are reading to them. It makes a difference. You're teaching them the skill of active listening. You're teaching them phonological skills. You're teaching them punctuation skills. So if you want them to learn something, it's one thing telling them opening means X, Y, Z. Or a phrasal verb is something that sounds like this. It's different when you get a story that is age appropriate, that is grade appropriate, and you read together with your children. Or ask them to read out aloud, or read the thing for them. Identify those key things that you want them to learn. Then keep probing them, Remember, those phrasal verbs, those sayings, those similes, and all those things you want to teach your children about language would have been used in that story in a particular context. The context, most of the time, is going to reveal the meaning of these things, of these new words. So patiently carry your children along, let them read. The same thing with experiments, give them experiments. What is filtration? How do you purify water, for example? I'm sure this is something that kids, at least in the senior grades, grade 6, 7, even grade 5, they've been taught. How do you purify water? You should have done your homework already. What are the different ways in which you purify water? Do experiments together with the child. Go outside, get a bottle, cut it out. Get 2 bottles. Remove the cap. Put a piece of cloth underneath. Put some soil in. Put water. Put the thing in a tumbler. See how the water goes out. Filtration process. It's very simple, very easy. The child understands. The child uses. He's had different capabilities. The same thing if you want to teach the various shapes of the moon. Don't tell them half moon, full moon, and ABCD. Take them out. There will be some kind of moon out there, and they will see and will understand what you're talking about. Encourage participation. Encourage your children to ask you questions. But of course, be careful not to make them rigid. Because remember, at some point they will go back to school. And different teachers have got different strategies. Some teachers allow children to ask questions as they teach. Carry up your hand and ask your question. Some teachers prefer that they have to finish whatever they're doing first, then you can ask your question. So be careful when you're engaging in your child, not to make the child develop some rigid expectations in terms of the process. So organize visits, for example, when it's safe to do so. In this case, I'm now looking at the post-COVID dispensation. Take them out to the park. If you're in Nairobi, take them to the national park in Nairobi. They will see the natural environment. Let them learn naturally. Of course, guide them. They will see the different kinds of animals. There's something to learn there. Take them to the museum. It's a different environment. Take them to the National Archives. Take them to the snake park. They will see different kinds of snakes. So when you're talking about different kinds of animals, it's not just stories. It's something they can relate to. They can see an alligator. They can see a black mamba. They can see a lizard. They can see this and this and that. It makes a difference. Okay? So active learning, ladies and gentlemen, it's very, very important. It allows the children to take control of their own learning. They take responsibility for their own learning. Now, let's move to the next principle, which is linked to the one of active learning. Now, this is where, as a parent, in this case, you parent as a teacher, is try and steer your children away from memorizing or just putting money in this ATM. You see, the ATM does not complain. You can put in 1 shilling, you can put in 1 million. Of course, now with 1 million, there are problems because you have to do some other things there. The authorities require you to indicate where you got the money from. But the ATM does not complain. You put in any money, you can put in dirty money, you can put in clean money. Your child is not an ATM. Of course, the ATM remembers. It will give you a receipt or something that you put in 50 bob, or you put in 100 bob, or you withdrew 300 shillings. It does not complain. Your child, I repeat, ladies and gentlemen, is not an ATM. Your child has got skills. Your child has got interests. you know, and you have to appeal to those interests. So don't get me wrong, memorization is important. But as I said earlier when I was moving through the various principles, when you tell me this is a rule of thumb, I forget. When you show me, I remember. So learning should be geared to gaining knowledge, developing capabilities, skills, competencies, and not just memorization. Of course, memorization helps to commit that knowledge to memory, you remember. But understanding helps you to go beyond just remembering, but understanding the concept. Now, let's go back to the example that I gave. You know, if you take your child out and you want to teach them about the various shapes of the moon and what the various shapes of the moon mean, of course, the expectation is you would have done your homework yourself and you understand what the different shape connotes. So you take your child out and the child looks at the moon. He says it's a full bright moon. It's not just about the shape of the moon. It's also about using that as an opportunity to teach something about probably the solar system or exactly what that means, you know, in terms of the science that the child needs to learn. Now, in the context of what you're talking about now, the children will not just remember the shape. The children will remember the underlying knowledge around why the moon is a half moon, why is a quarter moon if it's ever quarter moon, why is it a full moon, why is it brighter during some times, why is it not brighter during some other time. The child learns and is able to transfer this knowledge, you know, beyond just committing it to knowledge, to memory. So learning is better when the material that you're trying to teach your child, ladies and gentlemen, is organized around general principles and explanations. You know, when it's based on memorization of isolated facts and procedures, the children forget. So all teachers, and you parents as teachers, you want your children to understand what they're learning and not to memorize in a superficial way. And how do you do this? The back of the strategies are linked to what we talked about earlier. That is active learning. Active learning. You know, you create activities that develop and demonstrate a child's understanding. Again, I'll go back to the experiment that I mentioned earlier. How do you purify water? You take soil, you know, you cut a bottle, you know, you replace the cap with a piece of cloth. You call that piece of cloth a filter. So the child understands, you know, when you're talking about a filter, it's not just some, you know, something airy-fairy that sits somewhere in the sky, and understands the concept of filtering, you know, understand the filter can be a piece of cloth, you know, it can be cotton. A filter is something that allows some stuff to go through and holds back some other stuff. That is the concept the child needs to understand, as opposed to filtration is the process of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. I don't know if that is clear, ladies and gentlemen. It's very important. So the child can see the concept and the concreteness of the concept. The child understands both. Okay? So ask them to identify, give them feedback as well, as a way of making sure they've understood. Give them feedback all the time, you know. Ask them questions, you know, does this make sense? Why are we putting a cotton bag, cotton, for instance, or a piece of cloth, you know, and how the filtration process works with different kinds of soils. If it's sandy soil, of course, the process happens faster. If it's a loamy soil and ABCD and it's smaller, you know, finer particles, the process is smaller, it's slower. And probably when it's smaller, finer particles, soil, the water, the filtration happens, it takes longer, but the water is a bit, you know, muddy. The child understands, you know, because the impurities that we're trying to separate from the water of this nature. Then you use that again as an opportunity to now tell the child, look, this water is still not ready for drinking. You know, you need to take it through another process. the child can then relate with it, the child understands. It's different, for example, if I may use that one last example before we move on. For instance, if your tea leaves, if you're trying to make tea and the tea leaves accidentally fall into your glass of water, you know, now the tea leaves, it's not poison. So you can use a strainer, or you can use the filtration process if you want to teach that concept. And the child can say that, look here, the stuff you're filtering out did not poison the water, so it's okay. You pour the water, the thing through a piece of cloth, whatever the filtering material is, and you can drink the water. The child can see that when it's muddy and dirty, it's not ready to drink at that particular moment. Okay, so again, engage their various senses. Let them understand these concepts. Let them be able to apply them beyond just remembering. The third principle, ladies and gentlemen, that I would like us to talk about is the principle of social participation. Now, learning is primarily a social activity. It's the things that we can do individually, you know, but it's essentially a social activity. You're not learning about things in a laboratory that do not apply in real life. And so it is important that as parents, now as teachers, we create opportunities where our children can socially learn, can develop their social skills. Children are not born with social skills. Social skills are not innate. They are developed. They are cultivated. They are nurtured. They are supported. Exactly what you do with your children. When you tell them, no. If I give you money to go to the shop, you must bring me change. Don't just assume you're going to keep the money. So the learning process helps that. Now, of course, this is applicable mainly in learning environments where we've got more than one learner. So these might appeal probably mostly to parents who've got multiple children that they have to homeschool, that they have to support at home. So find a way of giving them activities that they can do together as a team, even when the children are in different grades. There are a number of activities that they can do together, like the experiment that I mentioned. Get one of them to cut up the bottle, get one of them to get a piece of cloth that you're going to use for filtering. Get one of them to get the water. Get one of them to get the soil, or different types of soil. Why is this important? It's very important because they learn from each other. Remember, they're quite confident when they're talking to each other and engaging with each other. Children and human beings like to demonstrate that they know something. But also, by learning together, it's a very natural way, you know, the play thing that I mentioned earlier, where the children come together. They learn a number of important skills. One, they learn the idea of working together. And they understand the processes that go into working together. You have to have rules of engagement. Who is leading this team? So help your children to identify one of them, to lead them. In certain cases, probably don't need to do that because one of them is a natural leader, is naturally going to emerge, you know, and lead the process. They learn about decision making. They also learn about taking responsibility because here and there they will make a mistake. And don't get me wrong, mistakes are extremely important for children to learn. It's very important that you allow your children to make mistakes. Let them mix different kinds of soils and put in water that they shouldn't have put in. It's a learning opportunity. The important thing is how you help them to understand that they shouldn't have done that. Okay? So again, as parents, there's so many things that you can do to encourage social participation in ways that facilitate learning. You can assign them group work, assign them particular roles, things like role play, where you're part of it as a parent. You know, Role play is very important, you know. You're part of it as a parent, and you use role play to reach out to them. You create an environment at home, you know, that includes spaces where resources are shared, where the children understand that no, Anyango is now busy with these other stuff. We cannot use that stuff. We will wait for Giviji to finish with this stuff, and then we can put it together. So the key point here, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, is that social learning is about helping our children to learn how to cooperate with each other. So you create circumstances for them to interact with each other, to express their opinions, and to evaluate your opinions as well. So it's not just about parents who've got multiple children. Even if it's just one child who's going to school, make yourself, or both of you, if you married, you know, as part of that social learning group. It's very, very important. It's very supportive. It's a very natural way in which children learn. The other important principle is the principle of meaningful activities. Now, you would agree with me, ladies and gentlemen, that most of us, or probably all of us, it's a sapiens thing, that we learn best when we participate in activities that are perceived to be useful in real life. Now, most of us, the gripe we have against our schooling experience is that we struggled to relate to most of the things that we were taught. We struggle to see sense in some of the complex concepts that we were taught. You know, most of our teachers, or many of our teachers, did not help us to relate what we're being taught with our day-to-day lives and activities, so that we were able to relate with those things that we're being taught beyond just them being theoretical concepts that we struggled to understand. You know, when you're teaching your child about shapes, why is it important that there's a shape called a triangle, and that there's another shape called a square, and that we've got pyramids, polygons, and hexagons? Why is that important? You know, why is that important that they get the tense right? It's because if they don't get it right, they will not be able to communicate effectively. So the child understands. Why is it important? And the English language has millions of rules. Why is it important that your children, in this case, your learners, your students, master those rules? How do you relate that to your daily lives? You know? So again, at home, and we will explore this further on Tuesday and on Friday, you know, every opportunity is a learning opportunity. If a child is speaking to you, it doesn't matter what language you speak at all. But for instance, if it's English. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
I saw I'm muted, so that's why. Sorry, I just see a message has come through. I'm just give me a second just to check if it's something that we can. Okay, all right. Thank you. I'm glad you can hear me. So we're talking about meaningful activities. So the point I'm trying to make here, ladies and gentlemen, is that let's try to make the things we teach our children meaningful. For instance, the example I gave about the moon and the various sizes. How is that linked to seasons of the year? So it's not enough to just take your child out and say, look here, that there is a half a moon, there is a full moon. That's not enough. You need to explain to your child what it means when the moon is full. Say, for instance, in terms of seasons, you know, when do we experience shorter days? How does the moon look like when we experience longer days, which would be summer in the northern hemisphere? You know, how does the moon look like? You know, when we experience shorter days in winter again, in the Northern Hemisphere. Even back at home in Kenya, in Mumias, where I grew up, we saw the same things. There are times of the year, you know, the day is shorter, the sun sets a little bit earlier than it does normally, you know. So get the children to understand these things and to master these things, you know. So again, students develop a closer link, a closer relationship with what you're teaching them if they can relate with it, be it mathematics, be it Swahili, be it English, everything that you're doing, you know, get them to understand why this shape is important, why it's important to take measurements, why is it important that they need to understand this and understand that. Let's now go to another extremely important principle, and that is the principle of relating new information to prior knowledge. As I mentioned in the initial overview, one of the critical rules of thumb when it comes to teaching is that you have to try as much as possible to proceed from the known to the unknown, which means you have to look at what the children already know and build on what they already know to introduce new concepts. That way, there is continuity. They are able to relate what you're telling them to what they already know, and what they already know then supports what you're telling them. Remember, your children are not blank slates. They already possess some knowledge. They already have some skills. You've already imparted in them some beliefs. They already have some understanding of particular concepts and conceptions. More importantly, why it's very important to build on what they know is there is a possibility that there is a gap in what they already know, that they have a certain misunderstanding of something and they do not know. So there's something in education which we call the entry behavior. What is the entry behavior of the learner? What does the learner already know? Then you build on that to introduce something new. Okay? This is very important. Let me give you an example of something that a child may misunderstand. And which is how, for example, do plants obtain food? Most learners, and many of us adults, will tell you that plants obtain food from the soil. It's quite intuitive. It's straightforward. You put a seed in the soil, the plant grows. So the food comes from the soil. But we know that plants make food through the process of photosynthesis, which then means that they make the food in their leaves. The food does not come from the soil. Okay, now, if you ask your child, how do you think, so you want to introduce the concept of photosynthesis or something like that, and you ask them, about plants, how they make food and blah, 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 blah. And they will tell you this, and you will see the gaps the gaps that they have in the knowledge that they already have. Then build on that knowledge, relate that knowledge, the new knowledge to what they already know, having clarified whatever misconceptions might be there. It's difficult for anybody, including yourselves and myself, to learn something that is completely unfamiliar. Some prior knowledge, I cannot emphasize this enough. Some prior knowledge is necessary to understand the task at hand. Now, get this. The source of the knowledge, the nature of the knowledge is critical. It's not all the knowledge the children have that is going to come from the books that they read. A lot of it will come from the movies that you allow them to watch, the children movies, the Mickey Mouse, the Barbies, Barneys, and all those kinds of movies. Now you might find this controversial. But it is important, parents, that you watch the movies that your children watch with them. A lot of those movies, the children movies especially, have got some very important learning opportunities, which then provide you provide you with a point of departure. Now, you'll be killing multiple birds with one stone. One, it's something they enjoy. It's something they like. It's something they've been talking about since they watched it. So they already like it. They're positively disposed towards it. Secondly, they understand it, but they understand it in a particular concept or in a particular context. Now, pull it out of the movie fan context and use it as a learning opportunity to explain something, So please, 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 the things your children watch are critically important. Watch with them. Therein lies massive learning opportunities, not just as points of departure, but also opportunities that you might want to use to clarify something. Every now and then I try to watch these things with my daughters, and I learn a lot. Now, they may not understand it using the language that is used at school. Your role there for them is to surface it and make it, make them to understand, these concepts in the context of how these things are presented at school. So there is continuity. So teachers can discuss the content of a lesson before starting. As new as parents, you need to discuss amongst yourselves or just reflect on it, in order to ensure that your children have the necessary prior knowledge, in order to activate this knowledge. Some of this knowledge is latent. And a lot of us, because, we learn quite a lot, and a lot of this knowledge becomes latent. So we need to activate it so that it provides you with some kind of a vehicle to drive the understanding and the acquisition and the mastery of this new knowledge and these new skills. Now, often, students' prior knowledge is incomplete, as already mentioned. There might be false beliefs and critical misconceptions. So you do not simply need to know what your children already know before you teach them something about a new topic. You need to investigate the possibility that there might be something that they probably misunderstood or do not understand properly. Now, you may need to go back to cover some important prerequisite material. Remember, teaching is scaffolded, or learning is scaffolded. Like Ngazi. You don't jump onto on top of the Ngazi. It's a scaffold. So unapanda ya kwanza, unapanda ya pili, unapanda ya tatu, unapanda ya nne, like that, you get to the top. It's the same thing with learning. You scaffold it. So by trying to understand what your children understand, you identify the sections of the Ngazi that they skipped, and then you use that as an opportunity to fill in that knowledge. At times you get frustrated with your children because you think they're taking too long to understand, but probably there is a gap. So be patient. Be patient. Try to understand what might be missing, what they need to know first for them to be able to understand the new thing that you're trying to teach them. Colleagues, maybe the last concept I would like us to discuss for today, then maybe we can have questions, is the idea of being strategic. Learning, as much as we're saying it has to happen in as natural a manner as possible, and teaching as well, and that we should reproduce the kinds of experiences students have when they're playing. The process is a very deliberate process. It's goal-orientated. And if it's a deliberate process, then you who is facilitating the teaching, as a teacher, you have to be strategic. Remember, you are not a know-it-all. It's the worst form of arrogance. To imagine that you as a teacher, it doesn't matter what profession you are. Doesn't matter how many qualifications you've got. The worst form of arrogance is to purport to know it all. No. You have to be strategic. Your role as a parent teacher and as a teacher in any case is to facilitate learning. The learning is the responsibility of the child. Your role is to help he or she to acquire the new knowledge, the new skills. They are not blank slates. So you need to find ways of employing effective and flexible strategies that help them to understand, to reflect, to solve problems, and of course to remember. Don't get me wrong. Memory is a very important part of the learning process. But this has to be underpinned by understanding. So children develop strategies. The children themselves, in fact, they develop strategies that help them to solve problems from an early age. I suspect, at least for me, I had that experience, but probably you as well. You know, during those days, when it was safe to send a child to the shop outside of the complex where you live. I grew up in Nairobi. I was born in Pumwani. I grew up in Makongeni, Nairobi. Went to school, St. John's Primary School in Kaloleni before my parents decided it was time to go back to Mumias. But what is the point I'm trying to make here? Living in Makongeni, the shops were about 500 meters away. So you'd be told, hey, kijana, kuja, enda dukani nunua nusu mkate, gazeti, tofi mbili, and treat of moja, or whatever the case might be. They didn't write those things down. You probably had the same experience. Then the process started. Now, this is where strategy kicks in. You're like, okay, nusu mkate, maziwa mbili, peremende moja, na sukari nusu kilo. The problem though, we overdid it such that by the time we got to the shops, we forgot. Instead of nusu mkate, we brought full of and bought peremende tatu, you know, and maybe we didn't bring milk. The key point here is not the forgetting. The key point is that you need a strategy. And the strategy we used during those days is to repeat these things, you know. Nowadays, we call it rehearsal. Before you perform, you have to rehearse. So it's the same thing. You have to get your children to rehearse, you know, assign them tasks and responsibilities, you know, supervise those tasks. You yourself, you also need to practice, you know, find tasks that you're going to give to your child. If you're going to teach your children from a particular room, well, surely you have to make sure the room is clean. You have to make sure hakuna mtura inapigwa hapo karibu and there is this aroma that is interfering with their learning. You know, you have to make sure there is light. You know, if you're going to do an experiment and you know you're going to need bottles and bottle caps, whatever you need, surely the day before or before the lesson, you should have collected those things. You know, you don't start looking for them in the midst of the lesson and those kinds of things. Another important thing around strategy is that kids need a variety of new information. Don't keep rehashing the same thing over and over again. Don't keep using the same example over and over again. It becomes boring. It ceases to be exciting, you know. So you need a plan. You use the example of the moon, look for another example. If it's a book, you know, a story that you need them to read, it cannot be just this one book that the child must read on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday. They get bored. They're just like you and I, you know. You read one book over and over, you then don't want to see it. So if you want to, the idea is to get them to enjoy reading, you surely should get a variety of books that are age appropriate. And a lot of this can be found on the internet. So in other words, you have to have a steady diet of new information, you know, so that your child's knowledge is in a constant state of expansion, so that your child is constantly hungry, for new information, so that your child is constantly excited about these new things, so that your child always looks forward for the opportunity to learn and to work with you on tasks here and there. So as a teacher now, you have to recognize the importance of your children knowing and using a variety of strategies. Diversity and variety is critically important. This can be done directly, or you can do it indirectly. You can give your children a task to go and put certain things together. The material that I mentioned that you might need for a lesson. Ask them to go and put it together. Tell them why they need to put it together. If you've got one or more children, you can give them group responsibilities. For instance, determine if it's a storybook. Do you want them to read the whole story? Some stories are quite long. What do you want to achieve? So plan in advance. Read that story. Determine the section you want them to read. Do you want the one child to read to the other, not for the other, to read to the other? What do you want to pull out of that, so that learning happens? As I said, it's a very deliberate process. Now, it's important to ensure that your children learn to use these strategies themselves on their own, that they learn to look for material, that they understand that they must do homework, that they must prepare, that they understand the importance of creating a conducive environment, which would support their own learning, that they understand that they need to explore different kinds of materials and be challenged at different levels. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would want us to stop. I don't want to give too much information for now. I see, it's almost an hour since we started. I would want us to stop here. Then on Tuesday, we will resume, briefly look at a few more strategies, like helping students to learn to transfer knowledge, which is linked with the idea of making learning meaningful. It's part of that process of making learning meaningful. How do you help your children to transfer knowledge from what they've learned to real life situations? I cannot emphasize that enough. Real life situations are quite critical in making sure that learning is meaningful. The whole idea underpinning competence-based education is in fact that children or learners develop competencies that help them to master their environment, that help them in their real life situation. So we're going to look at the idea of taking time to practice. We've already briefly touched it on that when we talked about being strategic. You have to practice. Remember, you are not a child, so you're busy with other things. You need to take time. Look at what they're reading. See, process it, read it with the mind of a child, not with the mind of an adult who is trying to explain it to another adult. It's very critical that you consider the point we made earlier around individual differences of your children. Do you know your child? Do you confuse the silence of your child with them being slow learners? Do you understand the multiple skills and competencies that your children learn or have? Some children speak very well, so they're linguistically competent or gifted. Some of them are musical. Some of them are kinetic in nature. They like movement, they like sports. Some of them are quite logical, and so they're endowed with these logical skills. They're able to construct things in a very logical manner. Some children will have a bit of this. Some of them will have all of them. Some of them may not have some of these things developed at the same level as others. Emotional skills and capabilities, motivational skills and capabilities. How do we work with this to assist learners, to achieve their goals? How do we motivate learners? If your child tells you or gives you an answer that you think is wrong, do you tell the child, this is stupid? you tell the child, hii ni ujinga kama mama yako. You know, growing up, I used to hear a lot of that. I wish I could say it in my mother tongue. They say, I'm jinga kama mama yako. I don't know why this. I think it's part of the macho patriarchy in our society. Or if they don't want to say mama yako, they say kama your relatives. Now they say like, is that how you want to motivate your children? So we're going to look at this, you know, and then dive deep into the actual, you know, strategies that then, you know, we have to apply in the actual situation. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thought today we should just look at the broader principles that underpin the teaching learning process. You know, how children learn. The idea that learning has to be a deliberate, active process. The idea that we must aim to generate understanding as opposed to memorization. The understanding that learning is a social enterprise, that you have to provide meaningful activities so the children can see sense in what you're providing them. The point that you have to build on the existing repertoire of knowledge that your children already have. And the last point that we spoke about is being strategic. Thank you very much for now, ladies and gentlemen. Unless there's a question, over to you, Grace.
Wow, I think that was a very powerful session. I've learned so much, and I think everyone else has learned a lot. I don't know if there are any questions or comments. I think I'll have to also introduce our managing director who has joined us earlier in the session so that he can be able to conclude as he gives a vote of thanks.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Grace.
Hi, Dr. Wangenge. I must applaud you for the exciting presentation. It is already about 3:20 and I can see all the participants do not want to leave. It is because of the captivating session that you've given us. Thank you so much. I want to suggest that for those of us who have questions, you can still send them to Grace, then Grace can forward them to Dr. so that the next session, which is on Wednesday, right? Wednesday at 2, you can answer some of the questions, because with the kind of talk that we've had here, if you are to answer our questions, I'm sure we shall end up preaching 4 or even 5. So just send questions to Grace, then Grace can forward them to Dr. for the Wednesday session. Otherwise, thank you so much, Dr. Wangenge, for this session. I mean, it's just amazing how much I didn't know, and I've always thought I'm a very good parent teacher. So, session. Thank you so much, guys, for your time. I'm sure you don't feel wasted. This is just what every parent in Kenya requires, and you can recruit some of the parents to come and listen to Dr. Wangenge speaking to us on Wednesday. From me, thank you so much, Dr. We'll catch up.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the questions on the next session on Wednesday. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely afternoon.
Bye. Bye, Grace. Take care. Enjoy your weekend.
All right. Bye.
Bye.